So as Mayur sets up, I'll just kind of share a little bit about Vijay. So one December morning, we met at Starbucks in Hyderabad through a common friend. So RTE, who was his batchmate, we overlapped in grad school. So she had connected. I had no idea what the conversation was going to be about. He was looking to pursue his DPhil after his master's, and he at that point of time just wanted to run ideas about some of the research topics he had in mind. So he was thinking about evaluating public service delivery efficiencies in Narega. And as we spoke, I explained about RTE section 12C and how it's a natural lottery. It lends itself to being a randomized control trial. Long story short, that became his research thesis, and he's dedicated his last 2 years to understand the effects of currency. So, Kafi Bar, this is the kind of question you all get stuck with. What actually is happening with this policy? So, once students are admitted. So, he studied multiple questions. Is the policy in Karnataka context? Is the policy really going to the people that it is intended to target? What happens to students once they are admitted in the first 2 years? What are not just the learning effects, but also what we call non-cognitive or other learning effects, and also effects on different social groups, whether it's by gender or whether it's different categories. So yeah, I'll open it up to him. He's back in Meghalaya cadre. He leads planning and the financial finance for the state. And so thank you for taking time to share your research with us. Yeah. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. Can we have a quick round of introduction?
Yeah.
So he introduced me. I'm Vijay, and we'll talk. Yeah. Can we start from here?
My name is Indus, and I'm based in Haryana.
Gayatri, I lead the Delhi campaign.
I'm Tushar and I'm into data analytics. I'm Kumar. I'm based out of Telangana.
I'm Salim and I'm based in Lucknow. Yeah.
I'm Sridhar. I'm presently working in Rajasthan, Jaipur.
I'm RTE. I work in research.
We also met.
Yes.
I'm Mahua, and I'm based in Bangalore, but I work in fundraising and private partnerships.
Okay.
My name is Simi, and I work in public partnerships.
My name is Minu, and I'm based out of Kerala.
My name is Arjun and I work out of the main office in Delhi.
Hi, my name is Gautam and I'm looking after the entrepreneur operations.
I'm Somsekhar. I'm senior level in NIC.
I am Mayur. I work out of Jharkhand.
Dr. Prahlad, I work out of TA.
I'm Cecil, I work out of the Delhi office in the strategy and management.
I'm Khush, I'm working out of Gujarat as a state lead.
I'm Prachi, I'm the state lead for Punjab and Haryana.
I'm Varun, work from Bangalore on fundraising and communication.
Ramesh, work from Bangalore.
I'm Tapas, I'm from Maharashtra, Bombay.
Okay.
I'm Hitesh, I'm based in Uttarakhand.
I'm Navya. I recently joined the Delhi team.
Dinesh, working as PE in Uttarakhand.
I'm Nayaranjan, based in Patna.
I'm Prakash, I work for research.
I'm Neha, I take care of recruitment and support operations.
Okay, great. So what we'll do is that I'll talk a little bit about, this whole thing is based on Karnataka and Bangalore and a couple of other districts. So in fact, for me, it's very exciting to also learn from you about what's happening in other states. So obviously, I'm not claiming that what's happening in Karnataka is true for the whole country. But again, given that this is a PhD exercise, in a PhD, the metric on which you're measuring yourself up to is precision and accuracy rather than scale. So it's basically depth rather than breadth. So that's why I did it in one state. Even in one state, 4 districts was a lot from a PhD perspective. But I know all of you are familiar with the 25% thing. So I call this the RTE 25% mandate because it is a mandate. Ooh. So sorry, I didn't make any presentation for this. These are the slides I made for my Viva, which was in June. So I'll just show you. Yeah, I think this is fine. There's the other one which kind of has the handouts too, but I think it's okay. This is fine too. So we all know what the mandate is, right? So it's 25% places in private schools and all that stuff. So the theory of change, because you focus on, obviously, I think all of us who are thinking of the mandate, we are concerned, people are thinking, like when I talk to my friends in the government who are running this as, mission directors, SSA and all, they are very concerned about the operations. They are very concerned about the implementation. How do we get these people in? How do we do it in an efficient way and stuff? But I think in government, especially at the states, nobody is really thinking seriously about what is the theory of change, what is it that we are trying to achieve, because everybody is assuming, or everybody has assumed that, you send poor kids to private schools, it's a good thing, right? It is a good thing, it should be a good thing, at least intuitively. That's what everybody assumes. But then, intuitively that sounds fine, but when you actually think of what is it that, when people wrote this mandate, or when this whole thing was enacted in the RTE Act, what was the idea? The idea is that there are poor people, there are poor kids, kids coming from poor backgrounds. They don't have the resources to go to private school or to afford a private school education. And that government funds this, sends these poor kids to private schools. And so two things will happen. One is we're talking about integration. And second, though it's not specifically stated in the main act itself, but again in all the discussions and the HRD documents, there is this implicit assumption that private schools are better than government schools, so we send kids to private schools, they will learn better. And ultimately we are concerned about that, right? So what I try to, when I say impact, I'm trying to understand impact from that perspective, not from the integration perspective, because integration is very hard to measure. It takes many, many, many years. I tried a little bit to check that as well, but anyways, as we go ahead, you'll see why probably in Karnataka it's not even that relevant. But when I say impact, I'm thinking of impact in terms of, as an economist, impact is mostly in terms of things that we can measure, which is learning outcomes, which also is, for all of us, a fundamental thing that we care about when you're talking about educating children, right? So basically, that is the theory of change I was very clear on. So this is the kind of theory of change, and if this is the theory of change, has it really happened? Has it led to improved outcomes to children? Is the question I was looking at. You know about the implementation, you know about the debates. I mean, you know about the debates, right? Everybody knows about, there are a lot of people who support this. They think that, people say it's a great way, it's about integration. So the leftist perspective is it's about integration. It'll bridge the social divides and build a better society and stuff. Even the more market-oriented people think that this is a good way of using government money, because government is just wasting money. We have been running public schools for like 60, public schools means government schools for about 60, 65, 70 years. What have we achieved? We are not able to ensure that teachers attend schools. So why don't we instead just give money to people, and then they figure out, and the market will kind of produce some efficient solution. So both on the left and on the right, people for different reasons are very keen about this. Whereas people, the opponents of this strongly argue, no, but this is about, we have, especially for example, if you go to southern states, I found this argument very, very strong, which is that we have in the last 20 years, at least since the SSA times, we have solved the access problem in some sense, because for us, the fundamental problem was access. I mean, there were no schools. So we created infrastructure, we did all. Now is the time to go to the next level, which is focus on quality and get the quality thing right in government schools. So why divert resources or use monies to send kids to private schools at this stage? And people very strongly argue, who said private schools are better than government schools? So there are a lot of people, I think though in the general public narrative, everybody assumes that private schools are better than government schools at producing outcomes. There's really no evidence for that. And a lot of people know this, and they argue, who said private schools are better than government schools, right? So these are the arguments for and against this. So against this, I was looking at these questions, which is, what is the impact of this policy? As I said, in terms of improving learning outcomes, has it really led to improved learning outcomes? And the second one, I think I'll only focus on the first one. The other two is basically, The second one is actually what I was just saying, which is, are private schools really better than government schools? So what we say is there, I mean, you know this standard thing, which is that when you look at the outcomes of public government, when I say public, I don't mean, I think in India public means private, public private, which is government and private. So when we look at the outcomes, like when you look at the results, when you look at newspaper article, which says 80% of the kids in government schools passed, private schools passed, whereas only 40% of the kids in government schools passed. So immediately we all think that, private schools are better than government schools because they are showing an 80% result, whereas government schools are showing only a 40 or a 50% result. But the problem with that is that it's not that the school is better, it's only that people who have better facilities, people who are better off in terms of income, people who can afford many other things are going to private schools. So it is not the school effect, it is the effect of all those things. It is the effect of parents teaching their kids at school, it is the effect of higher incomes, it is the effect of better nutrition, it is the effect of better exposure to things. So therefore it's not the school effect. So saying private schools are better is incorrect then, because it is the effect of all those things. That's why when in economics we try to understand which is better, we are talking of value added. So what is the extra value that a private school is adding? It's not, just comparing the results of kids going to private school versus public school, but it's trying to understand what is the extra value. If we send the same kids from same backgrounds, same everything, to both public and private schools, will there be a real difference? That is the question we are interested in, because that is what is value added. Otherwise, just looking at some results saying 80%, 40% doesn't tell you anything. The third one is, I think, not very, very related to what this now, and also, I want to focus on the first one. I will talk about the methodology, I'll talk about the findings, I'll go into details. Okay, so this is the first one. So, Karnataka, there are several people working in Karnataka here. I think if you look at my sense, almost I feel like my knowledge is maybe a little dated on this, but correct me if I am wrong, because when I was thinking of working on 25%, I did a lot of scoping. I went around states and I tried to understand which state is doing what and all. But I think post 2017 or post 2016 actually, when I decided to work on Karnataka, I didn't follow up on what the other states were doing. So as I said, my knowledge, I know very well about Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh, but the rest of the states I'm not sure. But my sense is that there are only 4 or 5 states which are doing this very well, in the sense at scale across the whole state, and they have started early, which is Rajasthan, Delhi, Karnataka, MP. Anybody else? Is Maharashtra doing across the state? Okay, so Maharashtra and Gujarat. So I was not aware of this. So, yeah, and also these states started doing, and in all these states, especially in the 4 states that I mentioned, the motivation for doing this was, I think people who were doing it were seeing this as a way, we are helping the poor. They were very, they were very sure that they were doing the right thing, that they were helping the poor. And this is also politically a good thing. I mean, politicians were going around and saying, look, we are sending, because going to private school is an aspirational thing for a lot of, parents, poor parents and all. So politicians were going around, and especially in Karnataka, and it's kind of saying, we brought this, we are giving you money, or we are paying the fees to send your kids to good schools. So that's the kind of narrative, and people who were doing this believed that they were really helping the poor, right? Now, a little bit of context on Karnataka. I mean, for you, it's not, you all understand what it is. So in Karnataka, okay, a little bit on also, now how do you study impact? I think before I go into Karnataka, I already told you what we mean by impact. No, sorry. I told you about what we mean by value addition, which is we are not just interested in comparing, the outcomes of private school kids versus government school kids. As I said, if I want to understand is private school better, or if 25% is working, a simple thing one would think is that you compare the outcomes of kids who are getting the benefit of 25% and kids who are not getting the benefit of 25%, right? That seems like a simple thing. Because if my question is, are kids who are getting the benefit of 25% learning better? That's the question, right? If that is the question, how should I answer this, or how should I test this? Any ideas? The question is, are kids who are getting the benefit of this doing better or learning better? Mm-hmm.
About the kids who haven't been to private schools,
Mm-hmm.
or like the tablet kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm.
And compare it to their learning outcomes after they went to the private schools and studied for a year and
Mm-hmm.
looking at their learning outcomes.
Okay.
Maybe whether it is.
No. Mm-hmm.
And sort of see what happens to them in terms of their learning outcomes if they remain in the government schools. And then
Okay.
compare the other set of group who actually, let's say, get through RTE 12-1C
Mm-hmm.
and see where they are after 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Okay.
But what you said is comparing kids who have already been to private schools and who haven't been to private schools.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean kids who are in government schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can clear my doubt.
Okay, I'll come there. So 2-3 things came up. So if the question is, this is the general point, not just about here. I mean, if, yes. Can I get some water? Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. But what about the genes? Kids are very different, no? No, seriously. In the same family, you have 2 kids, one is super bright and the other is not. Yeah. So I mean, I just wanted to, no, that's a correct answer, but that's why people take twins, identical twins and do. So they control for the genes also. So twin studies is a very, very popular way of doing these kind of things. Okay. No, I think what you said, see, the starting point is this, which is you have a baseline. Some people obviously know what RCTs are and all, but for the benefit of others who are not clear about why do these kind of things, from a very, very lay person's point of view, if you want to measure the impact of anything, forget about 25%. Let's say schooling. If you want to measure the impact of 5 years of schooling, what you do is you take a baseline, like what he said first. So you start with a baseline, and then you give kids 5 years education, and you measure at the end. So that is one way of saying, have they learned, right? Now the problem with this approach, so this is the simple what we call pre-post. So any kind of program, if you want to measure, let's say you are doing remedial education in schools, what is the impact of remedial education? So you take a baseline, pre-introducing the remedial education, and then do after 5 or months of remedial education or a year of remedial education, then you measure the outcomes and you say, yes, remedial education has led to improved outcomes, if there is an improvement. So that's the standard simple pre-post test we say. The problem with pre-post testing is that in addition to what you are doing, many other things are happening. So you don't know if the effect is because of what you are doing or because of other things, right? So if 25% you said, so kids are getting 25%, they're going to these private schools, and then you measure their outcomes after 2 years, 3 years. So you don't know if the effect is because of going to a private school, or maybe kids just learn very well at that age stage. It's a natural learning process. So when you say, hey, because of my private school, kids learn so much, you don't know if it is because of your private school or because of your policy or because that's the way learning happens. So this is the problem with pre-post testing. So the other way to do is basically compare 2 groups. So compare groups who did get the benefit of some policy and groups who did not get the benefit of some policy, and then compare their outcomes. Now what's the problem with this? So these 2 groups are not similar, they are not comparable. So you may try to kind of find comparable people, but they are not, even as he said, even if you take within the family 2 kids also, they vary at a genetic level. So they are not the same. So there could be so many other things why these groups are different. So I mean, why I'm trying to explain is that then I think if you have this framework, it makes understanding everything and thinking about RCTs very easy, which is that the classic way in which newspapers, journalists and all think about is people are doing one of these 2 things. people are doing either pre-post, which is problematic, which gives you some sense. I'm not saying it's completely useless, but it is not, it's nowhere close to precise. The second one is people compare groups. But comparison of groups is that these groups are not identical to start off with. So there are fundamental differences. The private kids versus government school going kids example. So therefore you do randomization. So that's why somebody said randomized control trial. So randomized control trial is basically you create two groups which are fundamentally identical to start off with. If they're identical to start off with, then you do an intervention on one group, then the difference is because of the intervention, because everything else was the same. And how do you achieve that? If you do, it's very simple. If you do this is just, simple mathematics and statistics, which is if you have a group of 100 people, just even with us, we're like how many, 40 people? If you randomly assign, 40 is a small group, but if we had 100 people, if we randomly picked up 50 people in one group, 50 people in another group, and measured a lot of parameters of these people, even unknown parameters like, things like lactose intolerance or something, they'll be identical at the group level. It's not at the individual level. So this identity is at the group level. So you create two groups randomly. If you have a number above 100, or the higher the number, the better, but even a ballpark of 100 each or 50 each also should work. If you compare the characteristics of these groups, height, weight, everything will be identical as a group. Not at individual level, obviously people are different, but as these two groups are identical. Now you say, okay, I have now two identical groups. Now on these groups, I want to do the intervention on one group and see what's the effect. So that is the central, logic of using randomized control trials and, doing them. So basically, the opportunity for me or for any researcher working in development economics these days is to have some kind of a randomization where you can create these two groups, what you call the treatment and the control groups. So if you're able to create these two groups in a situation, and one group gets some intervention, the other group doesn't get, and if you simply measure the outcomes of these two groups and compare the outcomes, that difference in outcomes is a perfect parameter of the impact of whatever you're looking at. That is the whole logic. So in Karnataka, as in other states, I guess, and this is where Tarun kind of gave me this idea, otherwise I was looking for some situation like this, as I said, or as all development economists do, but I was completely unaware of this. So, and these lotteries were being held, I think every state does lotteries. Delhi also does lotteries, Rajasthan, I'm sure Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat also do lotteries, right? Obviously lotteries are required because we have more people than there are places, right? So I chose Karnataka for various logistical reasons, and also most importantly because the lottery was much cleaner. I think let's not go into the technical details of the lottery and other stuff. This is important for economists, but not for us. Okay, yeah. So basically, I used the lottery to create two groups of kids. A treatment group, which got the benefit of the policy, which means which was offered a place. So a group of kids who were told, okay, you get a free place in a private school, go. And another group of kids who were not given that offer. So these are the two groups, and these two groups, as I explained, are statistically identical in all observable and unobservable characteristics. So that's pure mathematics and statistics. So now I took kids who applied to get into class 1 in 2015. So Karnataka started in 2013, but 13, 14, they were basically doing local lotteries at the school level, which were obviously not completely transparent. There were questions about these lotteries and stuff. 2015, the government did in Bangalore a centralized lottery. Everything was transparent. There was really no way in which anyone could game the system. So I took the 2015 data. 2015, I took class 1 applicants. So because this was at entry grade. So I took class 1 applicants. These kids were average 6 years. And then I measured the outcomes of these children after about 1.5 years of schooling. So basically, I did the survey in 2016 and 2017 beginning. So when they were kind of near the end of class 2. So they entered class 1, they were at the end of class 2. So 1.5 to 2 years they went through schooling. So I tested these kids at that time. Now I had a sample of about 1,600 children. This is a very big sample for a study of this. This sample was drawn from 4 districts in Karnataka. I think I have a map, people who know Karnataka. So this is Bangalore is like, I wanted to do predominantly in Bangalore, but we also wanted to see how, because Bangalore is very different from the rest of Karnataka in terms of the availability of schools, the understanding of parents and stuff. So we did Bangalore and we also did Gulbarga and Ballari, which are very poor northern districts. Okay. So we tested kids. These are 8-year-old kids. Obviously, so a fundamental question about this is, oh, our results at 8-year-old, are they really meaningful? Do you think they are meaningful? No. No, seriously, I want to hear your perspectives. I'll tell you what I think, but now one of the fundamental questions here that people would ask, economists will never ask. Economists are just concerned about outcomes. If you have the outcomes, they're happy, even if you get the outcome. They measure outcomes of kindergarten kids also. So, but then other discipline people look at you and they're like, 8-year-old kids, are these outcomes reliable? What do you guys think? I mean, yeah, depends on what kind. I measured these basically math, English, Kannada, and I called it some cognitive ability, which was basically doing some puzzles and stuff like that, doing some tasks. So, no, my question precisely is, our test scores, which are conducted using, it was a 90-item test, it was based on the, standard instruments, and we took about 2 hours, we administered these tests one-on-one on kids. Our enumerators sat with the kid for 2 hours and did these tests. So, what I am seeing, are they real measures of learning? Are they reliable measures of learning, is the question. You wanted to say something?
I have a question.
Yes.
In your previous slide, you said 6,000 matched pairs, and here it says 6,600 or so.
Oh, no. I think 6,000 was the complete population, probably. Okay, but where is 6,000? Oh, 25,000 is across the state. In the sample districts, it's 6,000. In these 4 districts,
6,000 people who you found.
I found 6,000 pairs of kids who I could match.
You chose 800 pairs.
Exactly.
That was random?
That was random. Yeah. I'm coming there. Dependent variables are outcomes, basically, learning outcomes.
And the independent ones. So,
Yeah.
what are your variables that you are basing your hypothesis on that?
So when you have a randomized control trial, I mean, when you have created these kind of treatment and control groups which are completely identical, you basically don't need any other variables. You can just do a simple difference of means, and that ideally should be your outcome. I mean, should be the parameter of interest. But you do measure. I mean, I do measure control for a lot of things. You collect data on control things primarily to show 2 things. I think for 3 things basically. One is to show that at baseline they are identical. That is to show balance in the technical terms. Second, to kind of show that your results don't change even when you control for these. And third, it improves the precision of your estimates. It makes the standard error slower. Sorry, this is a little technical, but anyways. Yeah.
The quality of schools, like the different kinds of schools. So there is a huge variation in private schools.
Right.
Now doing this random, would it really reflect the reality? I would say there's a lot of demand for the higher schools.
Right.
A huge number of applications.
Correct.
So those kids who got into those schools, if they have to figure in the random one, would it be a right sample, or should you do a stratified random sample in order to ensure that this variation is also counted?
It's a very, very good question. So I think I'll just get to this towards the end. This is about our whole, the kind of private schools. I think when we say private schools, we tend to think it's a uniform commodity. We don't tend to think, I mean, we all kind of know it's not a uniform commodity, but a lot of people, kind of tend to think, oh, private schools are great. But what they actually mean is the top 5 percentile schools are great. And if you see the number of kids who are getting admitted into these, so the whole 25 people who wrote the 25% kind of thought about those schools. Oh, we should send kids to Mothers International. We should send kids to DPS. We should send poor kids to these schools. That's how you bring integration. But the point is, if you look at all the private schools, the numbers in any state and the number of places that these top schools have, it's not much. It's like 5 to 10%. So therefore, there is a philosophical kind of disconnect between what people thought about in the policy and what is in terms of private school being a very diverse market. But coming to your question, I wanted to do stratification, but then I realized that it was becoming, because I was doing it in 4 districts and I was doing pairwise matching. So I think there was a technical reason why I didn't do stratified, because I was not getting enough people in different brackets in all the districts. So it would have been ideal if I had a larger sample, for sure. Yeah. Then I would have been able to estimate the impact at each level of fees. Very true. Yeah. Now I'm only able to estimate the average effect, which is for any private school, for an average private school. Yeah.
But your question about
Are the test scores at age 8 reliable indicators of learning?
So an educationist would probably argue that couple of abilities don't develop by age 8.
Yeah.
So one is kind of the reading comprehension, the test taking ability, those tend to mature by say 3rd, 4th grade or 1st grade. So taking it at end of 2nd grade, there is an unobserved variable or an omitted variable, which is these varying abilities to take tests, to read and comprehend questions, to be independent in taking tests, etc. So that's one.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, educationists would argue that it's
when I presented,
it's not reliable.
Yeah, in seminars and stuff, economists would be very happy, as I said, but people from other disciplines would raise it. Yes.
I think just adding to what Tarun said, what we measure at age 8 is very critical. So there are certain things that a kid is supposed to learn at, let's say, in class 1 at age 8. So if I measure that, then I think it's a credible, data to show that a child is learning, because there will be progression. For example, a skill like problem solving, there are different benchmarking also in a skill like problem solving that a kid would learn at age 8 and then eventually also at age 17.
Right.
So I think that's how it also makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I argue that it makes sense, but I'm skeptical. I don't know, because when but the other thing when you say about randomized control trials is if there is some omitted variable, it is there on both sides. So there is always that thing. So fine. So, and also I kind of show that, in a sense, if you look at the histogram of these test scores, it's very well distributed, except the math score where maybe our test was not great in the terms, because any great test should have ideally a normal distribution of outcomes, because you should have both. I think we did this exercise, we tried to fine tune the test and all. We did a pilot in Delhi as well. But except the math, I think everything is reasonably well distributed, which means some kids were doing very well, some kids were doing not so well, and majority of the kids were doing okay.
Another thing at the age of testing. So also if you're looking at the environment, we are looking, so class 1 is when these kids get admitted into a new sort of environment, which is different from where they belong, and they know that they are different.
Right.
So I would assume that in the first few years, they are still struggling to find their own place in that ecosystem.
Right.
And at that point, if you are and testing these kids at that point might have some, the outcomes might have some impact of that sort of fear of or that hesitance of being completely themselves or
No, fair. But again, when you have a randomized control trial, you say it washes off because it's the same in both sides. But then you can always, Okay, fine. So the parameter then that you're estimating kind of is inclusive of that. In a sense, yes, I take your point. This doesn't wash out, but the way I would think about this is, first, so if you are saying, okay, maybe after 2 years, the kid has not adjusted enough, and the outcomes you measure are not real outcomes. Maybe after another 4 years, the real outcomes will come, right? This is the argument. It's possible. I'm not denying that. But then there's a lot of research. Again, as I said, I am skeptical about these things, because once you steep yourself in research and do all these things, I think if you're honest, the only route or path you can take is being skeptical about things, because you can never be sure, especially in social sciences research, because for every research which finds something, there is another research which finds something else. Then that brings us to the question of then what is the whole point of doing this, but let's not get there. So I take your point, but the only thing that at least a lot of people ask me this. So what I say is there's enough research, at least there are a lot of studies which show that test scores at even at age 5, 6, 7, in whatever environment they are taken, are reliably good indicators of future test scores and even life outcomes. So basically what I'm saying is if these kids have not adjusted in 2 years in that environment, it's very doubtful if their adjustment and that having an impact on test scores will change as they move along. At least that is the sense from existing research, but one can never be sure.
You can never assume at grade 5,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you've given the kid 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
No, absolutely.
And if even then there is a problem in adjustment, then it is an issue that needs to be addressed separately.
Right.
That has something to do with integration and how the classrooms are being made inclusive or not. It's
Right.
on the teacher, it's on the school.
Right.
So there are those factors.
Right.
But I'm just saying that even if you send the same teacher
Mm-hmm.
also to the government school to teach the same kid,
Right.
the outcome would differ just by the virtue of environment and years.
Yeah, fine. That's a valid point. But then, again, as I said, now this is, you can argue it both ways.
Yeah.
As I said, so I take your point, but, this is the best that I could measure given the circumstances, right? Fine. Okay. So in addition to outcomes, learning outcomes, I also measure psychosocial. Now, why I measure psychosocial is because of the same thing, which is there is this whole narrative that kids, when they go to these completely new learning environments, they could be at a disadvantage because, it's completely new and they are out of their comfort zone and stuff. So I measure these things, self-efficacy, the level of peer support they get, the level of how do they feel about their school, how do they feel about their teacher or the way the teacher treats them and all. So this again I took from standard instruments where you ask questions to kids, which is basically, do you like your school, or do you have friends here, do you play with kids during lunch break, or stuff like, are you good at math? These are framed as statements, and the kid has to just agree or disagree. So we came up with a good way of having these counters where the kid would pick up the number of counters depending on how much he or she agrees with that. So basically this went off well, but again, if you look at some of these measures, there are a lot of ceiling effects, especially in the top panel, which is a lot of kids kind of agreed a lot with our statements. So there's not enough variation in this, but then again I did some, if you kind of torture the data enough, the data will give you something if you have large enough data. So I did some other kind of, these are all again very well accepted methods. So basically my raw scores didn't give me much of an effect, much of a variation in outcomes, but in the sense I followed alternate strategies to kind of make sense out of this as well. I'll show you the results. I think we need to, as I said, control variables are not required, but still we use them. So this is the classic when you have an RCT, randomized control trial, you show balance, which is you show that, these kids, these two groups were identical. So you measure them on a range of things, and you show that there's been absolutely no difference between these two groups. And so by demonstrating that there's no difference in observable qualities, you argue that there's no difference in unobservables as well. Because as I said, even genes is important. So basically that you can never observe. So the argument you make is you show that it's randomized, so they are identical on observables, so they should be identical on unobservables as well. It's not important. Okay. Now this is the result. So if you see, basically, again, I don't want to, it's not about understanding the table. If you see, treatment means basically getting the benefit of this policy. So as I said, I had two groups. One group of kids got this benefit. They said they were given the chance to go to a private school without paying any fees. Now, that is the group of kids. I compared the difference in outcomes between that group and the group that didn't get, and the comparable group, which is the lottery losers. So if you look at all the outcomes, these are basically total test scores, the cognitive ability, math, English and Kannada, there's absolutely no difference in test scores. The 0.04, 0.01 is the difference. Again, this is standard deviations. I mean, we don't have to get into that. But basically, if you look at any of these tables, stars, if there are stars on top, it means it's a good thing. Stars means there is some result. If there are no stars, which means there's no result. Okay?
So there was no English in 2016 in government schools. In first standard.
Okay.
No English.
Okay.
Starts in sixth standard.
Okay.
They just introduced recently.
Yeah.
So it means that all those who didn't get 12C have got into other private schools.
Absolutely. Bingo.
That's the exact point there.
That's the exact point that we found out.
So it's not comparison with government schools at all.
Absolutely. But that brings us to the whole point of how 12.1c is being implemented. I'm coming there. That's precisely the point. The point is this. So on learning outcomes, I find no difference. There's no difference between these lottery winning kids and the lottery losing kids on all the things that I measure. Because we would assume, as he rightly said, if lottery winning kids are going to private schools and lottery losing kids, we would assume should be going to government schools, right? Is it not? Because the whole premise is that these are kids coming from poor, disadvantaged backgrounds. They cannot afford to go to a private school without government's help. And so government steps in and says, I will help and I'll ensure that these kids go into private schools. But now even if the lottery losing kids who are comparable, which means they must be coming from similar economic backgrounds, similar parental income, similar parental education, but if they are also, if there's no difference in outcomes, what does it mean? So he kind of got the point, which is the exact point, is that if these two groups of kids are having the same outcomes, and especially if some subjects like English are not even taught in government schools, which means these kids must be going to, the lottery losing kids also must be going to private schools. This, I think, a lot of us kind of intuitively, so I'll come to this even on psychosocial, I find no differences. In fact, this is also interesting. On self-efficacy, I find there are stars there. I don't know how many you can see, which means there is a difference. But what is our hypothesis? Our hypothesis is that kids who are going to private schools should feel a higher sense of, inferior, which is basically our assumption is that these are poor kids, they're going to private schools, they don't adjust there, they will have a lower self-esteem. That's the argument you were making. And that's the argument which all of us have when we think of this, right? So which is that kids who are going there should be feeling a little lower self-esteem or lower sense of self-efficacy. But I find that they are actually higher than the private school, than the control group. And this result is, there are 2 stars on it, it is statistically significant. So these are the results I find, and then I explain why. Yes?
So why is the fact that the kids, the control group children actually go to government school, private schools and not government schools, why is that an inference? Because you selected that lot, right? So you would know where they are already.
Who?
The children who have not been admitted under 12C, who have been selected for this research.
Right. Yeah.
So when you select itself, you would know that when you're administering the test itself, you would know that they are in private schools, right?
We knew.
So did you want to then change it to government schools so you could find a difference in learning levels?
So here is the thing. Now, again, as I said, so there's this joke about economists. They say is, we are not looking for the truth. We are looking for what we can exactly establish. What we can precisely measure, rather. Okay. So the question here is, the only way in which you can find the true effect is if you have randomization. Now I have randomization only at this level, which is I have a group of people, I don't know who these people are. The assumption is that all these people come from poor backgrounds. So some got the benefit of the policy, some didn't get the benefit of the policy, and that benefit was randomly assigned. Now I can only measure the effect of this random assignment on this group of people. Now if there is another group of people who have not even applied to this policy and are really poor, I can't compare them with the lottery winners. Because if I compare them with the lottery winners, they are fundamentally different. So what I'm getting is anyways not a useful parameter, right?
And subjectively, can you tell if there were notable differences in the, not as an economist, but subjectively differences in the control and treatment group private schools itself.
We are getting there. Okay.
So couldn't you have then, like amongst the children who did not win the lottery, couldn't you have then selected those who went to government schools? Then it would have still been similar, right?
We have a small group. We do have a small group, and I have the results for that. Yeah, but that I don't have enough power because it's a very small group. I have like 100 kids out of 1,600. Yeah.
But the result, like as I can see from last, like back to
last slide. Yeah.
I saw it that in both the cases the environment did not affect the learning outcomes, right?
Yes. Yeah, because the environment was the same basically.
No, in case of private school children and
Government school children.
Right? Both the cases, but the environment, it did not affect their learning outcomes.
Yes. No. A lot of my kids in the sample did not go to government schools at all. I'm coming there. Okay. But from the few kids who did go, yes, the results are coming from that small group, but I'll show you that. Just give me a minute. Okay, so this is the whole point, right? When I found, you're right, when we were doing the survey itself, we knew that everybody is going to private schools. But then our assumption at least was, maybe because the private schools is not a uniform commodity, because we all knew it's not that most of the lottery winners in any state are going to government schools. They're going to private schools only. But our assumption was, our hope from a policy perspective is also that at least they were going to better private schools because of the lottery, which means I can afford 10,000, but now because of the lottery I'm sending my kid to a private school that charges 20,000 fees. So even if that was happening, that's a significant push. Government has achieved something by doing that, right? So if we assume that, because today, at least in urban areas, a lot of, even people who earn a monthly income of like what, 10,000, 15,000 also send their kids to private schools only. So if that is the case, therefore what I see is, first is, I find that, okay, how do I easily explain this? So this 0.6 is a percentage, so which means what I find is 99% of my treatment children and 93% of my control children go to private schools only. That's the first thing I find. So which means the difference in private school attendance rate between the lottery winners and the lottery losers is only 6 percentage points. So that's the 0.06 that is shown there, right? So that means everybody who is applying to this are people who would have anyways gone to private schools. Whether you have this, so this is the big policy implication, because see these things, people are saying this, all of us intuitively know this. A lot of people are saying, people come in cars and apply to this policy, people are dropping their kids in, the parents are very well educated and all that stuff. Yes.
So Vijay, I don't know if the scope is, going into understanding the economic status. Say if the parent is anyway sending his child to a better school but at a subsidy cost, or if they are sending in the same kind of private school which they would have otherwise, and the impact it had by giving this subsidy under the scheme. The economic status, how it has better the family otherwise, if you have captured that.
That's very hard to capture. So I'll come to that as well. But I'm just getting there. So that's the next result. So then when we say that both are going to private schools, then we at least thought, okay, maybe there is a difference in the type of private school, because private school is not a uniform commodity, right? So then I used fees, the private school fees, as a measure to kind of see what's the difference between the type of private school. So the difference in fees between the control group's average fees and the treatment group's average fees, or the treatment minus control, is like 1,300 rupees. So there's only a difference of 1,300 rupees between the fees of the schools that the treatment children were going versus the fees of the schools the control children were going. Annual. And the control mean is 12,400, which means the control children were going to schools which were charging in the range of 12,500, and the treatment children were going to schools which are charging about 14,000, right? So that is the difference. So immediately with this, what is the most striking thing that comes to mind? If you look at the number, the difference is only 1,500 rupees approximately. How much is the government spending on this policy per child? The government is spending something like 7,000 rupees per child. average again. The reimbursement is 10,000, 12,000. I mean, Karnataka it was 12,000, but then 12,000 is the highest, so in all the districts they don't give 12,000. So average was about 7,000 or some number that we worked out. The government is spending 7,000 to achieve an effect of 1,500 rupees. So this is from a policy perspective, this is like, we all know again, Rajiv Gandhi ji said long ago that 15% is only what reaches effectively the people. So it's something like this. And here, this is not even corruption. This is just, bad, poor design, poorly thought out. Anyways, so this is the difference I show in the fees. Basically, one graph, the top line is the control children, the bottom line is the treatment children. So ideally, you would have wanted the gap to be much bigger between these two lines. So the gap between these two lines is the impact of the policy in terms of shifting children to schools. Because what I started off to measure learning outcomes. I measured learning outcomes. I find no difference in learning outcomes. So then when I tried to see why, basically this is the key thing that I find, which is that the policy has not moved anything. We have not achieved anything on average. Again, there will be 10 children, 20 children who have gone to better schools and stuff. Or even 5%, let's say. But still, on average, if you look at a macro level, at least in Karnataka, it has not done anything. So we have basically, from an economic perspective, we have given 7,000 rupees to infra-marginal households, basically households which don't need your money. They would have anyways gone to a private school. So you've given them 7,000 rupees extra. Now coming to your question, has that 7,000, obviously if you give money to people, good things will happen, right? So these are what we call general equilibrium effects, but then to measure that, you will have to measure the entire household expenditure. I measure on education. I measure on education of the siblings. Has this 5,000 translated into better education for the siblings or 5 or 7,000 subsidy? No, I don't find any effect, but who knows, they would have invested on health, they would have invested on many other things. So doing that is a massive data exercise and you'll never be able to find that out.
So Vijay, for policies like there are longitudinal effects, right? First couple of years, typically there's elite capture.
Right.
So is it possible that if the same data was collected maybe 3 years down the line, would there then be a divergence? Like would the most marginal then have a chance for lottery because of better information and more applicants?
I'm getting there.
Yeah.
So,
just to stick with this for a while and to add to Tarun's comment. So is it also, the reasons for this in this particular sample also, could it be that the information that parents have is not any different from what they would have apart from the act, right? So I would have I know that these are the 10 schools that I can send my child to,
right.
And I still know only about these 10 schools. So I don't even know that there are better schools that can still provide me a subsidized seat.
Okay.
Right? So my list remains the same.
Okay.
And it's just whether I'm applying directly or I'm applying through RTE.
Yes.
So is that one of the reasons why? Because the pool of the schools remains the same for the parent.
Right.
And since they don't know about the availability of seats in higher quality schools,
right.
Assuming higher fees as proxy for higher quality.
Right.
So they don't know about that, which is why the application remains in the same.
See, in a sense, with the neighborhood restriction, it's not that there's much choice because parents can only apply to schools in the neighborhood, right? So in a neighborhood, what is the average number of schools in a typical neighborhood? In Karnataka, it is defined at the ward level. So even there, in my third paper, actually, that's what I look at. Do parents actually know what these schools are? Do parents know? Do parents understand anything about the school's ability to generate outcomes, or parents just looking at a big building, word of mouth, everybody says it's a good school, let's send? That's what I look at in my third paper. And I do find that parents care or parents have information on test scores. But in this particular case, the average number of schools that a parent has access to is in the range of 6 to 10 anyways. So parents, at least in urban areas, my third paper I only do in Karnataka, I don't do in the rural areas. In Karnataka, parents know all the schools that are available to them because there's a neighborhood restriction. They can't anyways go outside, right? You want to say something?
No, so it's interesting about our assumptions that even I observe in my village the poorest of the poor also he or she is trying to send their kids to the nearest private school.
Correct.
Okay. So when it, although in my गाँव में जो school है, जो government का school है, I mean because all the teachers are from my village, so they have, you know, over the years they have brought the quality. I mean output, learning output is like far better, but still. I mean, parents are sending their kid to the nearest private school, although they don't have a like good building and yeah. So yeah, it's interesting about what we, I mean, assumed first that parents were poor, they're unable to send their kids to private schools. I mean,
exactly. And also the problem is, I think, in most cases, see, this is the whole thing about free markets, right? If there is demand, if parents want it, and parents seem to want it across the country, schools will come. The only places where I think there is massive government sector enrollment is in rural areas, isn't really, I mean rural in the sense again, very remote rural areas where it's not viable for private schools to come up. It's only, I think, for a lack of a private option, most urban, semi-urban areas, even the poorest, when there is some kind of availability of the school, are going to a private school. This is my sense too. But anyways, let's just finish this. I'll get to Tarun's point in a bit. So this is what I basically infer, which is, I think all the applicants to the policy are people who could have gone to private schools anyway. And they could have gone to decent private schools. A school charging 13,000 rupees, whichever was my control mean, per annum is a decent private school, which is 1,000 rupees per month. That is the average private school. You're not talking about Mothers International, but you're talking about an average private school. In Karnataka, I have the whole statistics. In Karnataka, the average private school charges about 15,000 rupees per annum. That's the fees. So if you look at, it's not even the average, it's the median private school. So the private school at the 50th percentile. So basically the people who are applying to this policy are people who have the ability and willingness to send their kid to a median fees private school. These are not your bottom 10 or bottom 20% or bottom 30% people that you wanted to target. So the program is mistargeted, so these are design problems. This is not because of poor implementation by design. So a lot of people say, oh, we can fix this as an implementation problem. But I think in India, for every scheme, we don't have a way to ascertain income. How do we know anybody's income? And a lot of people could say, oh, we should move to an income-based, we should move to this whole EWS. But I think EWS is very, very problematic. Ascertaining who is EWS is a very problematic thing. That's why in rural areas we do in the BPL list, we don't look at income, we look at assets, we look at proxy ways of identifying the poor. So till now we have not figured in the urban areas what is a way of establishing poverty. And the poverty census of the state governments are all the time incorrect, because again these are based on political considerations, and in southern states 90% of the people have poverty card. So poverty doesn't mean anything. I mean establishing poverty. So there's a fundamental problem there. Now what are the solutions to that is a different question. So as I said, policy implications is government is spending 7,000 to get 1,500 worth of services. Now coming to Tarun's point. So then what I did is, okay, this is exactly what Karnataka government people said, which is that, look, this is the first year, people didn't have information, and this is just Bangalore, who knows in other places, I mean this is just 4 districts, who knows if you go across Karnataka, things are different, and stuff like that. So we said, okay, now we have a simple way of finding it out, because initially I was interested in measuring learning outcomes and stuff, but now I said, now we don't have to measure learning outcomes, we only have to find the school where the lottery losing children are going, and then compare the fees of the schools of the lottery winning children and the lottery losing children to get this graph. This graph is nothing but, the fees of the lottery winning children versus the fees of the lottery losing children. Because my whole argument is, if the children are going to the same fees schools, if both treatment and control children are going to government private schools, that means there is a problem. And if they are going to the same fees private schools, which means you have a big problem, which means the policy didn't change anything, didn't change or didn't target the right people. So what we did is that this is very easy to find out, right? Just which school people are going. So we did this on a sample of some 20,000 children, I think. So across Karnataka. So then we did a 2-3 month telephone survey across Karnataka to find out where the lottery losing children, because lottery winning children we knew where they were going, to find out where comparable lottery losing children were going, and then we got the fees of those schools and we did this, it's the same. So across Karnataka, this is the next year. You're saying maybe 10 years hence, I get the point. I'll come to that. But in the next year also, we find the same results for the whole state. That big bump you see there, that is the 5% kids. There were only like 5 to 6% government school going kids in the control sample. So it is those kids, the fees is 0. After that, you have everybody going to private schools with charge fee. So in a sense, at least in Karnataka context, we have established that this policy has not really reached out to the needy people. We did the same thing in Delhi, if I remember right. In Delhi, the number was around 20%, slightly better. This was again in 2017, if I remember. But again, in Delhi, the lottery was too complicated, so I'm not 200% certain about those results, because there was a bit of a problem in the lottery itself. Problem in the sense, mathematical problem, but I mean, administratively, it's a good lottery. But still, in Delhi, it's far better than Karnataka, for instance, where Karnataka, the compliance is 5%, in Delhi, it's 20%. So we're doing now the same in Madhya Pradesh. We are finding some 25 to 30% compliance in Madhya Pradesh, which is a good thing, which means at least, you know, in your whole group of applicants, there are 25 to 30% really poor families.
What could be the number that are left out of the system? In a typical ward in Karnataka, in which you study, there are people who go to private schools, lottery winners, lottery losers, government schools, those who are out of the system.
What do you mean? Children not going to schools at all? I think in South India that's... I won't know that number, but I think especially I can speak for Andhra and Karnataka, I think dropouts is very, very less. It should be, I think dropouts or non-enrolled children should be even much less than 0.5%. No, 0.5% is also a big number. It will be much lesser. My sense is it's close to 0.
Okay. Yeah. But that's not what we saw in other states that are largely rural. Like in UP and Bihar, the dropout rates are as high as 30 to 40%.
I'm not surprised with UP Bihar.
Policy. And what that basically says is that, you know, the children are not pursuing education. And the biggest reason for dropout is actually that the child simply did not pursue education.
What about the parents?
Sorry?
What about the parents? I mean, in the sense, if the child is dropping out, what are the parents doing? I mean, what do the parents have to say?
They did not allow the child to pursue.
Oh, the parents did not allow the child. Okay. I mean, 30-40% is, even for UP Bihar, I think huge.
Overall, the country is also very high. So a huge problem in policy discussions right now is also how do you, so you get kids to school, but how do you keep them in schools?
Okay.
Another aspect that I actually wanted to raise was, in a study that is, you know, where we're trying to find out, and literally I can see the gap that is maximum is for a very small percentage, right? So it's not just that I'm giving 1,200 bucks of value to all the families that we surveyed. They're probably giving 5,000, 4,000, 10,000 bucks of value to a very small percentage.
Absolutely.
So
this is the average.
The average does not matter.
Yeah.
Because the actual benefit is literally going to even a smaller percentage.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's one point.
Yeah.
And the second point that I actually wanted to say was that in terms of, you know, let's say we look at, you know, reasons for dropouts, etc., and we consider that whether the actual benefit is reaching the child or not in the school.
So these dropouts are kids who have got the benefit of the 25% and then dropped out, right? Okay.
So they got the lottery admission.
Right.
There were reasons for which they did not get admitted at all, and then there were reasons when they got admitted and then dropped out.
Right.
So there's of course like a variety of reasons, and there's a variation in both categories. But what I meant to say was that in a state like Karnataka, Andhra, where the dropouts are low, I would say awareness about the policy is decently high.
Right.
We are talking about lack of value for a family via this policy.
Right.
And when we look at these states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, etc., where the policy is literally not even strong enough to sustain a child or keep a child in school.
Right.
So there, let's say, you know, this is for 100% of the kids who got admitted, almost.
Right.
There you will see that for only 60% of the kids.
Right.
And further, this number, the small number that I see here, 4 to 5% probably will get even more small. States have sufficient freedom to change implementation methodologies and to modify the policy to a certain extent.
Right.
But there's no guidance for them to do it. They don't have access to this information. They don't have access to retention information.
Right. No, but why won't states have access to retention information? It's they who collect it.
Basically, it's where the non-profits come in, that they are trying to, like us, who are trying to conduct this research and trying to find information, but the state administrative policies or administrative methods are not really giving any information like that.
Okay.
So my question is that administratively, if this information is not even available to them, what will they do?
So this is.
I mean, what will they do? I mean, and you're talking about issues like not continuing education. That is something that a policy.
No, can I ask you this? So are they dropping out of the private school and going back to a government school, or are they completely dropping out of the schooling system? Could not continue education. Okay.
And we don't know whether the reason was discrimination. We don't know whether the reason was emotional harm, or whether it was that they just didn't see value in the education that they actually saw the child gain. So
what is the dropout rate in government schools in these states?
So the average, if you see UDIs and all, at primary level, it's less than 10%.
Yeah.
And what is basically this 40% is way too high compared to the normal dropout rate in government schools.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's also possible.
I think we've done this 1 year this year. I mean, yes.
No, for the last 3 years. The data was taken from the last 3 years. I mean, the admits and lottery winners were over the last 3 years.
So this,
25,000.
So this could be for a range of reasons, right? I see, in my view, I feel like probably the biggest reason is that it's not even probably discrimination, but it's more about, because my sense after looking at my results and looking at these kind of 20%, 15% compliances, even in Madhya Pradesh, the Madhya Pradesh is the highest we have got. We just finished the telephone survey recently. My sense is it's not even that there is discrimination or something. Again, this is just my sense. But I think it's, if kids are dropping out, it could be mostly because schools not treating them well, not because they are discriminating, but because the reimbursements are not being paid by the government. If the government is not paying them the tuition, then the school could, kind of start treating them or asking them to pay up. It could be that, is my sense. But again, so what could government do is a classic question for what could government do for every other program that's not working in the country, right? In a sense, if you take it, are there solutions? Yes, there are. I mean, are there answers to this? There are, but the only thing is, how do we make it systemic? That's the reason why I think Delhi thinks that, writing everything into a law or, something will help. Because the good thing with India is that India is like 29 different countries, right? India is not one country. When people say, oh, we are like too big, that's why we can't, do things. I disagree with this. We are not one country anyways, in the sense, in terms of development, because a lot of development is in the state list. So, or the concurrent list. So, which means states do all this stuff. So, we are like 29 reasonably sized countries in terms of human development, achieving human development and all. So, there are few states where there are good models. Like, I know for a fact that in Karnataka, they have automated this whole thing, and the school has to give the progress report of each child that is enrolled on a regular basis. Regular means maybe every quarter or every 6 months. Only then the school gets the reimbursement. So they have connected these two things. That's why I'm saying the dropout rate in Karnataka is very low. But again, my knowledge is again a year old. I have not been to Karnataka in a year, so I don't know what has happened.
So those are the people, if slowly the information penetrates to that level, probably you could get a higher number of admissions and applications from that category to this provision. I mean, see, what I am saying is that, in any poverty alleviation scheme, targeting and close working is very important. Like many NGOs do small little work in places because the really poor cannot access many things. That's why you need handholding, you need a long-term organizing of those poor children. It could be a similar case here.
So the various hypotheses for this, we are doing something to get a clearer understanding of this, but my sense is this. It is not even this. It's not. I think even if you have the information thing, I don't think I feel there's a fundamental design defect here, which is this whole thing that, oh, we want to send kids to Mothers International kind of attitude. Because I think where predominant rural government school attendance is there are not that many options of private schools. That is to me a fundamental problem. So I don't have the data on this, but I think if you just map where is because when you say aggregate statistics of 50% kids in Karnataka are going to private, but I think if you do the rural urban and neighborhood wise mapping, My sense is a lot of private government school attendance is happening in areas where there is no private option at all. That is my sense. If that is the case, then this is never going to help unless you fundamentally tweak something. This is one. Two is even in urban areas where there are many private options. Now, okay, so this doesn't answer your point, but I think even in urban areas where there are many, I'm coming there. Now the question is, I don't have the numbers, but my sense is in urban, for example, in Bangalore area, the government school attendance is only 20%. 80% are going to private schools. So therefore, the policy is meant to be, sending kids to private schools, sending kids whose default is a government school to private schools. But the default doesn't exist in your private school markets. That population which is default going to a government school, at least in a place like Bangalore, is very low. So this is happening in rural areas where the private option is not there. But in that case, your 25% anyways doesn't help them because the private option is not there at all. So therefore, go on, yeah. Okay. But if you see, okay, there's a point there as well. I think many of the government schools, many of the places, for example, if you look at districts like Bangalore, it's okay. But also if you look at coastal districts, there people strongly believe that government schools are better than private schools, right? And even in Bangalore, many of the government schools where kids are going to these government schools, these schools are good, or at least they're believed to be good. Whether they're good or not, I don't know. So there are a lot of things here. As I said, I studied specifically the thing that where I could randomize and stuff. But there's a whole lot of things to be learned here. And see, my sense after doing all this is fundamentally trying to ensure that, a lot of people even question this whole thing of, the integration business, which is sending, however sensitive the institution becomes, is sending a kid from a completely different background and, putting this kid in a very, very different background. Is it a good idea at all? There is a lot of debate on this. This is not a settled question. A lot of people think that yes, it should be a good thing, but probably not. There are different views. But getting back, what I feel is, my sense about the whole policy is this. To kind of summarize, is that yes, there is an information problem. As you move along, as people get more aware of this, as government kind of, as the awareness and knowledge about the program and stuff increases, your compliance will increase. Compliance, by compliance, I mean from 5% it could go to 15, 20, 30%, but it's never going to, my sense is there's a problem in design, it's never going to be higher than 50%. Because where the private schools are, where the large default government school going children are, there are no good private options at all because these are unviable. The people are really, really poor. So it's very hard for a private fellow to go and set up any decent business. And in the places where you have large private sector, government is not even focusing on government schools there. In Karnataka, in Bangalore, for instance, government's biggest problem is they can't establish more government schools because there's no space, there's no land, they don't have the ways, they're only running the old schools that they have. So in a sense, there is this mismatch between supply and demand.
I've just checked a couple of schools, not a big sample.
Yeah.
When I interacted with the headmasters and teachers, what they told is that they have a huge attendance issue. So in order to ensure that that school runs and they get salaries, they physically go around into the localities and pick up the really poor kids and offer them incentives and bring them to the school. And they run away. So that keeps happening. So
no, in North India, this is a standard problem. There are double registrations, right?
Like those are the kids that are meant for this policy. For example, if it's a free seat in a private school.
No, what I am talking about is, if I get you right, if I understood you right, is that this happens a lot in North India is what I am told, which is double registrations, which is the kid is registered in the government school, but they're actually going to private school because these people, just to get their salary, are registering the child in a government school.
Okay. I'm talking about basic attendance to sustain a government school, which is the responsibility of the teachers and the headmaster there. So what they do is, they have a list of children. There are 80 children in one of the schools. There were 8 teachers there. All of them paid very high salaries. That's a different question altogether. So they used to go to the neighboring locality in order to ensure that the kids come. They used to go literally to every house every morning. First 1 hour is the task to get the children to the school because they want the school to run. So
these children are not going to any other school.
They're not going to any other school, and the parents are not bothered.
Okay.
They say that these parents, they don't care at all for children's education. So it is a teacher whose responsibility to put the kid there, and they say that's the reason why our pass percentages go down. So these are all the things that I spoke to teachers there.
Right.
So my assumption is that those people who are choosing government schools do belong to a strata not just of poverty but also high ignorance on the relevance of education. So if there is some good work done, then this policy would be very useful for those kind of families. Like I'm not so much worried about whether government schools would survive or not.
Yeah.
It very clearly says in Karnataka, government is closing the schools.
Yeah.
It's very clear indication that there is not much of quality.
Demand for it.
Just for the sake of running, they are running within the urban centers. But pockets like North Karnataka have very good schools.
Yeah.
Probably because there is no choice. Because people would not establish private schools, and that may be the reason why the government schools are running. But many say that they are okay schools in Dharwad and North Karnataka areas. So I think. Comparing only the lottery apply. I mean those who are applying for lottery and sampling.
No, I know. It doesn't give the complete picture
of the economic situation of the families.
But my sense is, I don't know. My sense is, I think your assumption that there are a lot of parents, there's a good number of parents who don't value education is not something that I don't think that's correct. I think that number, if it is there, it's at least in South India, I can say for a fact, it's very small. I think parents have become very aspirational, even in the rural areas. Parents are keen to send their kid to a school and to an English medium school.
Very clear data would be
the
percentage of children going to government schools within the Bangalore city. That
Yeah.
is a very clear indicator for us to compare.
As I said, it's 20%. The number is there. It's 20%. Look at this. But the 20% are going to really good government schools. These 20% kids who are going, these government schools are really good.
How do we say they're really good?
They have far superior infrastructure. They are located in good areas. They are like your here Sarvodaya schools and stuff like that you have. It is those kind of schools. I'm not saying all of them, but the number is only 20% in Bangalore, and these government schools are infrastructure-wise far superior.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left.
Okay.
So maybe if we can step back and so if you were to kind of design, so two questions. So one is if you can step back and think about if this had to be designed from scratch, which is an opportunity in some states which haven't implemented as yet. So how would you approach that? Right? And adjacent question to that is states that have already started to implement, what are the tweaks on the margin that they need to make at a policy design level or in lottery design level, or it could be in terms of outreach as well or targeting. So if you could focus on those.
Just want to add to that.
I have very similar question. One is that organically, I mean, you see the delta going up if there are no interventions at a policy design level, which means just by more people getting aware, with more private schools coming up in areas where there are no private schools right now, you will see the delta going up. I mean, the people who would actually shift from 10,000 schools to 20,000 schools organically over time. And is there any way of accelerating that? By actually intervening at a policy design level.
Okay.
And since you have done research in Karnataka, and since we are there as well trying hard to work with the government, what do you think are politically and administratively feasible tweaks that we can make now? Considering the current situation, you've seen that it's not making such a great shake.
Right.
What do you think can be possible right now? What is possible that we can suggest to the government and work on?
Yeah. So, related to Darun's question, but slightly more leading, you said, would it make sense to compare, so since 96% of the control group anyway went to private schools, would a variant of this study where we compare the treatment group with control group that only went to government schools, would that then bring out really the difference between the groups? I know you are studying and brought out other aspects, but the difference between these groups, would that make sense as somebody doing this?
No, I have the results for that as well.
Okay.
Can you show?
And second question is this published somewhere? Can we quote this? I mean,
Yes.
is it available to us? To
It's, I think, Google My Name should come. It's a working paper in 3-4 places.
It's online.
It's online?
Yeah, we refer to actually.
Yeah, it should be there.
Okay.
I've just sent it to journal, so in the journal usually takes like a year and a half for the whole process, but it's already up there as working paper in a couple of places. Okay.
What I meant was a larger group. Taking a really large group.
Yeah. So see, to do this, okay, I'll quickly show. No. Fine. I'll show those results. Basically, what I find is the small group of poor kids really deserving the 5% who, because of this policy, have moved to a better school. I find their English scores improve dramatically. I think that speaks directly to your point, because in government schools, they don't teach English, so their English scores improve significantly, and their self-efficacy actually, instead of going down, improves. They feel better. They feel, so what do I measure in self-efficacy? My self-efficacy comes from 4 statements, which is I'm good at Kannada, I'm great at English, my math skills are very good, and similar something about I am overall good at studies or something. So how much they agree or disagree with these statements. So basically, yeah, this is the one. Wait. I don't know. I mean, if you see the ones that are colored are important, especially in the second panel, panel B. Self-efficacy, there's a huge effect, but there's supposed to be an English effect also. I mean, there was an English effect, not supposed to be. Maybe somehow the stars got lost when I was pasting the table or whatever. But the English effects also were significant. So basically for this, because this is coming out of only 100 children, I don't completely trust these results. This could be, just because of the sample or because of this, very special group. It's not even 100, it's 76 children actually. But the self-efficacy results are massive, and the English results were also significant. Somehow the stars are not there here, but they are significant. So that's what I find. So when kids move, so if in the ideal world, so if you kind of extrapolate these results, which again I say that they are not 100% reliable. My first results are 100% reliable because they're coming out of a much bigger sample. Is that if you were to send really deserving poor kids to private schools, what they would gain in English and self-efficacy according to my results, which means they won't feel discriminated, they would feel better actually going to a private school. Now, talking about the policy implications, I think there are, to speak also to your point, there are 2 things I find. One is we also look at the costs. If you're really thinking of kids going to government schools, now these are really poor families, right? They can't pay even like, whatever 300, 400 per month tuition fees, school fees, and send their kid to a private school. Now private school attendance entails not just the cost of school fees, there's a whole host of fees. Now we looked at the expenditure that parents make on a range of things when you send your kid to private school. This is, so government is only reimbursing the private school tuition fees. Now there is, I estimate that the costs are almost, the other costs associated with private school education are almost the same amount as the tuition fees. If I am paying 1,000 rupees as fees, there's other 1,000 rupees of other costs. Now how do we expect a poor family, a really poor family, to bear this? So even if you are giving a subsidy in terms of a school tuition fees waiver, this is what we call a partial voucher. It's a partial subsidy. So when you give partial vouchers, again this is established, it's commonsensical too, right? When you give only a partial subsidy, it's only the better off among the creamy layer that you're talking about, among the poor who can take advantage. So even in the best case, here it's not even happening, even that is not happening, but to extrapolate and think of the policy implications, one of my very strong sense is I would assume in Delhi things to be different. As I said, already we found a 20% compliance in Delhi. Maybe with time, if you do a study now or after 2 years, maybe the compliance would have gone to 30-40%. I think Delhi gives money for textbooks and other things as well, right? Other states, so in Karnataka, a lot of people have been demanding this. that you're only reimbursing tuition fees, what happens to other expenses? So this is something that I think could make an impact. And it could be an incentive for poor people to come. So my hypothesis, especially in a place like Karnataka, I don't know, working in different states, what you feel and talking to people there, is that information is not such a problem. I think people have the information. At least, as I said, in a place like Bangalore, it's informationally rich. Everybody knows what is happening, how to get the documents and stuff like that. In fact, Karnataka has very high document requirements. You should have an Aadhaar. So a lot of people have said that because of the Aadhaar, a lot of people, many disadvantaged and poorer people are not able to apply. But again, the Aadhaar compliance is also very high in the state. So the government is arguing that it's not an information problem, and I don't go by the view of the government, but even a lot of NGOs working say that it's probably not an information problem, it's a money problem, which is that the really poor know about this, but they don't have the money to. They know that private schooling entails additional expenses. So I think that is one. And a second thing is, while screening, again, different states have adopted different methods of screening the poor, or eligibility criteria basically. There's a lot of path dependence in this. That is, when you start on one path, you can't really go back, because obviously everybody will go to court. So in Karnataka now they started on this income path, which is you give an income certificate, that is the criteria or eligibility qualification. Now if you say I'll change that, or I'll change the income limit or anything, now there's a lot of politics in that. So everybody will, we all understand the politics of these things. I feel like MP started off on a much better path, which is, they said the BPL list is the eligibility criterion. So they don't accept income certificates, their eligibility criterion is the BPL list. So the BPL list, for good or for worse, has been made through a process. So a process has gone in, somebody has checked their assets, somebody has checked how much land the people have. So the BPL list is still in some sense a much reliable measure than an income certificate is the I think the loosest way of identifying poor, because it's the easiest certificate to obtain if you have money. So income certificate is hard to obtain for people who are poor. For people who are money, it can, it's easier to get an income certificate in this country, right? So I think looking at, for example, in Rajasthan, when they tried to change the income limit, or when they tried to actually make it, BPL list based, this was challenged in the Supreme Court. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down, saying that the Act says it has to be based on income, and you have already started, and you will disenfranchise a lot of people if you now move to the BPL based criteria. So I think if you look at, you are in a better position than I am, because I don't know what is the eligibility or screening mechanism in different states. So states like Madhya Pradesh have an advantage because they have started on a better footing than others, I feel. And if states which have not started should seriously think about this without just saying, oh, the Act says economically disadvantaged, so we do that. I think there are ways in which things can be learned from other states. One example I have is the MP example, but there are many other ways in which you can try to minimize the damage. Obviously, see, in India, we'll never, with any scheme, you will never achieve like 100% compliance. So anything above 50% is a good thing, and it has to be appreciated and commended. So I think two things is.
Other proxies which are more reliable, let's say if I've claimed a maternity entitlement under, say, right to food,
right.
If I've enrolled my child in Anganwadi,
right.
Is that likely to be a better proxy of?
Absolutely. So identifying the poor using alternate proxies is something that the states can do, but every state has to come up with its own mechanism, without a doubt. But that mechanism, because it's not an implementation problem, because once you say income, however good, even if you or I were the fellow issuing the certificate, how do I go and identify or establish anybody's income? Just not possible. So it's based on a self-declaration, and you give a certificate and you get it. I don't know how it is in Delhi, but I presume it's not very different, right? So to me, a few concrete things, in terms of the two concrete things I keep saying, is increasing the subsidy and giving some money directly to the people. We are anyways already spending money. Can we give them some additional money to cover textbooks, to cover other things? And second is also, the third is reimbursements. I think most states do not have mechanisms of reimbursing these schools, and so the schools are not very aggressive in promoting and encouraging children to apply. In many, this is another trend. I don't know if it's, if that is the case in other states, but in Karnataka, there are a lot of schools where nobody is applying. So there are schools, there's a set of schools, clearly, even people know, the poor also know, which is everybody wants to go to the top 20, 30 percentile of the schools. There are oversubscription. There are 10 slots, 10,000 people apply or 1,000 people apply. But there are a whole set of bottom 30% of the schools, again I am using fees as a proxy, where nobody is applying. These seats are going vacant. This is the case in most states, I guess. So now, but again, if parents are not choosing to go to this schools, I think nobody has any business to force or beg them to apply. But what the government can do, or what people like you can do to people increase the effectiveness of this, is if the government has good systems of kind of refunds and reimbursing the fees, then schools will be more enthusiastic. If schools are more enthusiastic, then the number of applications will go up, at least if parents want to apply. So schools should not be a stumbling block to this. I guess pretty much those are the 3-4 things I have. Yes.
Haryana there's a 134A where 10% of the children coming from a economically weaker section, meritorious students get admitted from 2nd grade to 12th grade in private schools. Would that be a better policy compared to, like, see?
Can you repeat that?
Would that be a better policy?
No. What's the policy?
It's 10% of the seats in private schools would be given to the economically weaker section, meritorious students, where they conduct a test, standardized test, and see if they pay like 55% of the mark.
Right.
Then they can get admitted into the school based on lottery if the children are more.
Right.
Now here you are calculating the merit already, and percentage is very low. Where if you say reimbursement should be made for all the incidental costs as well. So 10% is still a better figure where.
So how do they determine who takes this admission test for these 10%?
They have to apply EWS category.
Okay.
Yeah.
These again based on income.
Right.
Okay.
But not the disadvantaged community.
Okay.
Only the EWS.
Okay.
So is there, do you intend to do a study on that and see a comparison? Basically going to the question that Tarun has said, कि policy level पे अगर change लाना है, what would be the,
See, I think I am against, testing and picking up kids at that stage, for whatever policy. Because again, when you're testing and picking up kids, basically you're giving, so if the whole idea is to support or kind of, provide some kind of ladder of opportunity to the most disadvantaged, then this test itself is a discriminatory practice, because who clears the test? Again, somebody who has some kind of support at home are the kids who clear the test, right? So again, this is my view. Obviously a lot of
the meritorious part is taken off from that.
Okay.
And there is some kind of 10% category only, and identifying the real percentage of the children who are disadvantaged.
Okay.
And minimizing the category where reimbursements can be justified.
So you're saying if you make it from 25% to 10%, is it better?
Right.
But cover all.
But that would put children in a minority in the classroom setup.
Exactly. So I think the 25%, see, the problem is we can tweak the same system. One is, think a little bit more, I don't have an answer to this, about rural areas where there are no private schools. So if the goal is to provide not just, we have to move these kids to private schools, but to generate an alternative to a government school. What is the fundamental problem with government schools in rural areas especially? Is that there's only one school, and it's a monopoly, which means if you have to either go to that school or you don't have a school. So what one would hope in years to come, if there's enough government spending, is that even in these places, schools will come up. Now, in most states, I think you'll have to be in business for about 3 years or so to be considered for this policy. I don't know how it is in Delhi, but in Karnataka, you'll have to be in operation for some period of time. That is again to protect against, schools just coming up. But if government can set up a system where you're able to screen and allow schools to come into the system, I see even in these underserved areas where there is no option, you can create a private option. And with that private option, see, the whole economic logic of this policy is that there should be, some kind of competition. So where there is absolutely no option. So that is something that can be done, but I don't know if making it from 25% to 10% is going to make any difference. It will only probably the whole logic of 25% is that there should be some critical mass of these children, right?
The reason for 10% and meritorious, actually the policy's intention is completely different. There it's not necessarily social inclusion as such.
Okay.
There the reason it was kept at 10% and entry was allowed at multiple levels, not just class 1, was that the meritorious child will be able to sustain and perform better because inherently they are driven.
Right.
That's the assumption.
Right.
So that's why there is no risk of the child not adjusting, etc. They are taking well balanced, very serious students into private school. So the intention is completely different. That's not the worry there. The point is that what options are there for modification of 12C.
Okay.
So it's not just 25 to 10. There are other options possible.
There are other options, but as I said, in the states which have already taken off and which are going in a certain direction, I think changing course would require a fundamental, political commitment and strong desire to change this, because otherwise what has happened, and now in Karnataka they are completely, now they've gone from one extreme to the other extreme. Now they are saying they'll follow the Kerala model. So which is almost basically saying that, only when all my government slots are filled, then I'll let kids go into a private school. So to my mind, that is not the solution. So I think in Karnataka what they should be doing is they should be looking at how they move from this simple income-based system to some other slightly better system, and can they give an additional 3,000 or 4,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees, something like that, to these parents, to the real poor parents, to support them.
Yes. What is your viewpoint on reimbursements versus direct transfers of cash to families? So if to increase, let's say, the requirement of private schools in areas where there aren't many right now, and if these parents, low-income parents, have cash in their bank account, wouldn't then the system come up on its own to kind of care for this market, so as to say?
I completely agree. So, see, initially, the world over, what they do is they give money to parents. I think in India, because we don't trust parents enough, and we think, we have all kinds of ideas, so we devised this system. I think we are probably the only place where you give, where government controls, or basically the payment is to the schools and not to the parents. Because the whole idea is to empower parents, and there are various ways. You don't have to give, money. I mean, all of us know that you can give education vouchers, because basically something that can be used only to pay for a school. So that kind of thing can be done, and I think that's a much better way to generate demand in markets where there are no private schools, without a doubt. If parents have the money, if people see parents have the money, then schools will come up, and let parents can decide whether, because parents have already, as we all discussed, parents know which schools are good, which schools are not good. They are not sending, even if the government is saying we'll give you free money or we'll give you a free place, they're not applying to these schools. So if in a village, if you or I say we'll set up a school, we'll set up a good school, we want to charge this much fees, and if parents have this money, then yes, so that's how the schools will come up. So I think a fundamental thing could be to give money to parents. I agree completely.
Do you think that's something that can happen in our country? Do you see the
it can happen actually. So this is politically even better, right? See, I think we should have solutions which politicians like. See, to be fair to politicians, I mean, I don't have to go and get elected every 5 years, right? These guys have to go and get elected every 5 years. So obviously there are, and that is how, I mean, people after having, debated about all kinds of systems kind of said that democracy is the least harmful among all competing systems. So in this system, we'll have to look at solutions which are politically saleable, and this is eminently saleable because politicians would love to, instead of reimbursing to schools, going and announcing in villages, we'll give money. I mean, obviously, again, if you give money, but you should set up systems where you can give vouchers, basically. Nobody is selling this to them well. I think that's the fundamental reason. I think, see, the people who wrote RTE 25%, who are these people? I mean, they're all well-meaning, people, but mostly a certain kind of intellectual thinking, as we say, Delhi intellectual thinking, JNU intellectual thinking. It's not even JNU. I think let's not get there. It's a kind of thinking where obviously there is a lot of, my heart bleeds for the poor. I want to do something, but at the same time, I don't trust them fully. That's how most of our schemes are designed, right? So we need, and this is very, very saleable actually.
It's like, world over, a lot of aid agencies like USAID, DFID, like time and time again, there's been many RCTs that prove that giving cash vouchers or cash is much better than giving any kind of other benefits that are in kind or cash, but people still don't do it.
Yeah. I have a experience on that which I've experienced in most of us must have experienced in government school. In Delhi, it had this voucher system, but even in private schools, the NGOs had come and done the voucher system, but it was not utilized by the parents, saying some or the other they spend in something else. So I don't know. I don't have
their right?
I don't have the spend in whatever.
What if
we are not spending in books and anything, but spending on something. I don't have the number.
Sorry.
So, okay, one last question if it's really pressing, otherwise we'll close it here. Thank you. We can take this there for lunch, so maybe...
Yeah, just an interesting incident on vouchers. I was in Rajasthan once in a government school. They had this Rajiv Gandhi scheme where the toppers were getting, this is in senior classes, the toppers were getting checks to buy laptops. Toppers were getting checks to buy laptops. And the entire speech by that person who was distributing the checks was not about how you can use this laptop to do well and congrats on getting good marks and all. It was like, "Aapko jana hai, you have to buy laptops, you have to come back and give the registration number of the laptop back in the school, otherwise you will be punished, your parents will be put in jail, you cannot use this money for anything else." So that was how the entire event went.
There is also a public finance problem here. So effectively you use a voucher or you use any other mechanism. Effectively private schools have to be paid. I'm talking about voucher, let's not talk about DCD. But effectively the private school has to be paid. Education is a concurrent subject, so the state holds authority. Now the question is, do you provide a reimbursement or do you provide the bulk of the payment before the education even happens? And the amount of money that the state needs to disburse is way too large for it to, it basically creates an imbalance. The SSA budget comes to you, then you spend it. Here I have to spend the money before and then someone will pay me money. And these are significant chunks, right? There's a limit on 20% on the SSA budget, but still, it can be up to 15, it can be up to 10%. Does the state have this much amount of money to disburse it even before it gets the reimbursement? And that is a major problem because that's what's actually not happening. The center to state reimbursement process is going fine. They are, as long as the state has sufficient proof, which can come via an improved efficient process, that's not the problem. The problem is the states always claim, I don't have money. My SSA budget is spent on so many other things. That's what I got the money for. Where do I find extra cash?
Right. Now this is states which are doing it because if you look at every state there are competing priorities. Now this is a question of then, do you believe in it enough to kind of make an advanced commitment to this? And we all know, again I think there is a fundamental politics of this whole thing is, this was brought by the previous government in the sense by the Congress government, and so I think initially when the BJP government came, they were not super keen. If the same government was there, this wouldn't have been a problem at all, in the sense, because they brought in, we wouldn't know, but they would have made sure that at least money was not a problem. So there is that issue, but it again boils down to states that have the commitment are doing it, states that don't have the commitment, because you can always say there's not that much money, but it's not that much money, right? It is a substantial amount of money, but if you look at states' resources, they will be able to do things. They are doing all kinds of populist schemes, right, from states' resources. If you look at a UP or the Bihar, it's not that they are completely resource dry and they can't do much. So it's about prioritization. So now you are saying if the government of India can give money in advance like an SSA, will the uptake of states be better? Yes, the uptake will be better. But still, unless the state is committed to kind of making this successful, there are a lot of implementation issues where this could go wrong and effectively there won't be results even if it's being implemented. So I think The fundamental question to me is not whether government of India is giving the money in advance or later, but does the state have the commitment to do this? Is what I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vijay. This is
Thanks.